EBB ABS Training Webinars. This webinar is part of a series providing an introduction to EU access and benefit sharing regulations. It was developed by the Interreg-funded European Blue Biobank project. The European Blue Biobank project, or EBB, is a European Marine Biological Resource Centre project to promote compliance with access and benefit sharing frameworks for genetic resources derived from the Nagoya Protocol. It aims to facilitate sustainable access to marine biodiversity, its associated data, and extractable products for local and international academia and industry users. It also aims to incentivize biodiversity conservation in coastal ecosystems and provides tools to achieve these aims. These are the EBB Trace Database, a searchable catalogue of marine biological resources provided by the EBB Biobank, the EBB Track Tool for provision of macroorganisms, service supply, and biobank management, and the EBB EMBRC Best Practice Guide, a handbook for ABS compliance, which provides recommendations to marine biological resource collections and users' institutions, and the practical guide for users, Seek, Keep and Transfer, a step-by-step guide to ABS compliance when utilising marine genetic resources. This webinar is part of a series designed to provide an introduction to EU access and benefit sharing regulations for collections and users. Webinar 1 provides an introduction to ABS. Webinar 2 provides an overview of the scope of the EU ABS regulation on ABS compliance. Webinar 3 provides recommendations for institutions with users and collections of marine genetic resources. Webinar 4 considers managing ABS compliance and collections. Webinar 5, it provides an overview of compliance for users and a review of Seek, Keep and Transfer, a step-by-step guide to ABS compliance when utilising marine genetic resources. Webinar 6 discusses the EU registers, that is the registered collections and best practices as tools to support ABS compliance. We particularly draw your attention to the two handbooks provided by the project, the EBB EMBRC Best Practice Guide to ABS Compliance. This handbook is aimed at users, institutions and collection managers of marine biological resources. It provides an introduction, background and overview of ABS, user-friendly guidance to implementing ABS best practices for institutions. It covers a wide range of possible scenarios and includes technical guidelines and supporting material. Seek, Keep, Transfer is a practical guide for users of genetic resources. Users are guided through a 6-step process to perform ABS due diligence. And Webinar 5 provides a full overview of the guide. The following webinar and subsequent webinars in this series have been developed as introductory guides based on the EBB handbook and step-by-step guide. While the authors have aimed to make the information as accurate and up-to-date as possible, ABS is complex and evolving. The authors are not responsible for the results of any actions taken by institutions or users on the basis of information that is not within this webinar nor the EBB guides. The recommendations in this webinar do not supersede official texts or substitute for ABS policies that institutions may already have in place. Further specific information and support is available, and it is recommended that dedicated ABS support is sought from either the home organisation or from the ABS competent national authority for research in their country. Webinar 1 provides an introduction to access and benefit sharing. The presentation first considers the background to access and benefit sharing arising from the Convention on Biological Diversity and its Nagoya Protocol. And the webinar then describes key access and benefit sharing definitions and mechanisms and an access and benefit sharing overview. The geographic scope of the Nagoya Protocol for marine biological resources is described, and other access and benefit sharing regimes and regulations that may be applicable when using marine biological resources are considered. And finally, the presentation introduces a key information resource, the ABS Clearinghouse, Through the Convention on Biological Diversity, we signed at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in 1992 and entered into force on the 29th of December 1993. As of April 2021, it has 196 parties. A UN treaty, it is the first global agreement to cover all aspects of biological diversity and recognises in international law that the conservation of biodiversity is a common concern of humankind, and that states have sovereign rights over their own natural resources. The agreement covers all ecosystems, species, and genetic resources and has three main goals: the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of its components, and a fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising from the use of genetic resources. Its objective is to ensure the sustainable use of biological diversity based on the sovereign rights of countries over their genetic resources for the purpose of the conservation of global biodiversity. The principle that countries have sovereign rights over their genetic resource is a key principle for access and benefit sharing. So the Nagoya Protocol on access to genetic resources and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from their utilization is a supplementary agreement to the Convention on Biological Diversity. It was adopted on the 29th of October 2010 and entered into force in October 2014. It provides a clear legal framework for the use of genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising out of their utilization. When access measures are in place in a country, the protocol ensures predictable conditions for using genetic resources, which provides greater legal certainty and transparency. It establishes more predictable conditions for access to genetic resources through the prior informed consent of provider country. It ensures benefit sharing between users and providers of genetic resources through mutually agreed terms. And it ensures compliance, i.e. that only legally acquired genetic resources are utilised, and that's those with an internationally recognised certificate of compliance. So this slide covers a few of the key access and benefit sharing definitions and mechanisms. Genetic resources refer to any material of plant or animal, that's excluding human, microbial or other origin, containing functional units of heredity, and that includes its derivatives such as naturally occurring biochemical compounds. The utilisation of genetic resources means to conduct research and/or development on the genetic and/or biochemical composition of genetic resources, including through the application of biotechnology. And traditional knowledge refers to the knowledge, innovation, and practices from indigenous people and local communities related to genetic resources, and it is also covered by ABS regulations. And you should be aware that definitions may differ depending on national legislation. Some of the key mechanisms for access and benefit sharing are prior informed consent, abbreviated as PIC, and is the decision by a provider country to grant access to a genetic resource to a user. The PIC sets out the conditions around use. Mutually agreed terms, MAT, is the benefit sharing agreement between a provider country and a user of a genetic resource or of traditional knowledge. The internationally recognised certificate of compliance, an IRCC, is a record generated when the competent national authority of a providing country publishes a permit or equivalent, e.g. the PIC and MAT, on the ABS clearinghouse. This has a unique identifier and provides legal surety of the genetic resources covered and will assist monitoring of utilisation and reporting, and is discussed further in webinar 2. So the diagram in this slide is taken from the EBB EMBRC Best Practice Guide to ABS Compliance Handbook, and it provides an overview of access and benefit sharing. It outlines that users' access to genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge of a provider country is dependent upon obtaining the prior informed consent of the competent national authorities in the country of origin. Resources should then be used according to mutually agreed terms, which include monetary or non-monetary benefit sharing mechanisms with the country of origin. So the geographic scope of the Nagoya Protocol for marine biological resources. The Nagoya Protocol applies in the territorial sea, the exclusive economic zone for pelagic species, and the extended continental shelf for benthic species. It does not apply in areas beyond the limits of national jurisdiction. However, other ABS regimes and other regulations may also apply to marine biological resources, and you should be aware of these. So specialised ABS regimes may relate to specific biomaterial. So for example, for agricultural resources, the Food and Agriculture Organization International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture considers the conservation and sustainable, fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising from plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. And the World Health Organization Pandemic Influenza Preparedness, the PIP framework, provides a structured and transparent system for sharing benefits arising from the sharing of influenza viruses with pandemic potential. Research at sea is also covered by further evolving regulations. So the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, recognises that coastal states have the right to regulate marine scientific research in their territorial sea, their exclusive economic zone, and the continental shelf. So their consent is needed to carry out marine scientific research, including sampling biological material in these areas under their jurisdiction. There is a current negotiation of an international legally binding instrument for the governance of the high seas under UNCLOS, and this includes benefit sharing over the use of high seas genetic resources. And finally, a key information resource for you to be aware of is the Access and Benefit Sharing Clearinghouse. This was established by the Nagoya Protocol. It is an online platform for exchanging information on access and benefit sharing. The ABS Clearinghouse is a key tool to implement the Nagoya Protocol, as it allows provider countries to share information on procedures and monitor the utilisation of genetic resources and ABS compliance. For users, it provides information on national contacts, national ABS measures and requirements, checkpoints, and links to national websites and databases. And it also provides best practice guidelines, model contract clauses, and codes of conduct. An overview of all published internationally recognised certificates of compliance is available on the ABS Clearinghouse website. And as we described in a previous slide, these are generated when the competent national authority of a provider country publishes a permit or equivalent on the ABS Clearinghouse. So in summary, this webinar has provided an introduction to access and benefit sharing. It's provided key background and introduced and defined key terms and mechanisms and resources. The next webinar in this series will discuss the scope of the EU ABS regulation on access and benefit sharing compliance. And the following webinars will provide more information and recommendations for users and collections. So thank you for watching this webinar. Again, the authors would like to remind you that this is a general introduction to ABS and that the disclaimer provides important information that we would like to draw your attention to. To ensure compliance with ABS, you should refer to official text and also seek advice from your organisation or the ABS competent national authority in the state in which you work.